welcome to All About Boston. I'm Seth McCoy. We are continuing our series of interviews with at-large City Council candidates. Tonight, my guests are Michelle Wu and Gareth Saunders. If you have a question for either of them, first will be Michelle, and then Gareth will be on in the next segment. You can call us here at 617-708-3290. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So my first question I ask all the candidates coming in is, why are you running?
I'm running for family. I've been very much shaped by my own family's experiences and want to talk about the experiences of families all across the city of Boston. I'm the daughter of immigrants, the oldest of 4 kids, and watched my parents sacrifice when they came to this country for every opportunity for us. And later learned a lot more about family when my mom got sick with mental health issues. And today, I've been raising my sisters for the last 6 years. They live with me and my husband in the South End. So I've seen city government from a number of different angles: the legal guardian in the school system, a daughter taking care of my mom, still needing health care, and in the middle of all this had opened a family business and ran a restaurant for a while too. So I've experienced city permitting and licensing as well, and worked to try to improve that in City Hall for Mayor Menino.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've been talking about with a number of the candidates is the whole permitting process. If you're elected, what are some of the things that you would work to or towards so that it's easier for business owners to get up and running?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've experienced this, so I know how much every little delay can actually impact the business plan and just make things worse and worse. I think the biggest thing that we need to do is get information out to people so that business owners or even entrepreneurs who want to become business owners are starting from a baseline of information. When I worked in City Hall, my first job was to get all the information in one guide. It's called the Restaurant Roadmap. It's still online on the City of Boston website. It lays out all the permits, the fees, the contact information, and also got all the permits online. So I think that's the first step. The more that we can put out there so that people don't have to come to City Hall or to 1010 Mass Ave, just get started at home understanding the process, the better. I also think we need to be treating small businesses owned by local neighborhood entrepreneurs differently from larger businesses. So I would love to see an expedited process where if you're applying for a restaurant license or barbershop, whatever it is for under, let's say 20 people, whatever the right limit is, then you should be guaranteed a 2-week turnaround on decisions by the Zoning Board of Appeals or other major bodies so that you're not caught in that process of just waiting to hear back whether or not it's possible.
Right, it definitely takes a long time. I want to take a minute to go to a phone call. So
Great.
It's a caller who has a question about education. So caller, what's your question?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And my question is about education. And my question is, are you going to put in curriculum for both blacks, Hispanics, whites, and the other minorities? Because for many years, I myself, I've been brought up by the Boston public school system, and I haven't learned my own history. Are you going to put those curriculums inside the educational system?
So I guess the question is whether or not you'll work to see that there's a more multicultural history being taught.
Absolutely. I think that is such an important piece of education, that it's not just about math and science and what's tested on the MCAS, but really a holistic view of what kids need. And that includes things like the arts and culture and history. I actually did a tour of about 7 or 8 different schools in the last 2 weeks of class and this past school year. And one of the schools I toured was the Hernandez School. It's a bilingual Spanish and English immersion program that not only focuses on the language piece of it, but on arts and culture too. And so every unit that they do this incredible history and art combined unit where they are interviewing a family member, then they write the biography of that person, they draw a portrait of it. The MFA has a partnership so that they actually hang that art in the MFA, and there's a lot of lessons on sort of art from different pieces of Latino culture and how they can shape theirs to be like that. And it's just a very rich learning experience. And I know now, looking back on my education, I don't necessarily remember much that I did in any single class, except for the things that really stuck out because they reminded me of where I came from or some very rich piece of the culture around me. So I think that's a very, very important thing for us to be focusing on.
Thanks for the call. Yeah, I have to say that I have this notion that high school should be more like college, where the kids can kind of pick and choose what they want to be taking. For me, I hated math growing up. I never wanted to take algebra. I actually, said to my mother, I'm not doing it, so we have to figure out what we're going to do. But, students learn different ways,
Yeah.
and what works for one student isn't going to work for the other. So I think that we have to have a more well-rounded curriculum so that kids can
It's a tricky
pick.
balance because, when you're a very, very young child, you'll also say things like, I'm not eating vegetables, that's it. And so where do you draw that line? But I agree with you that I think making our high schools closer to college in one other aspect as well is important, and that is connecting education with employment and really making sure that high school kids, even middle school kids, see that what they're doing in the classroom is relevant and crucial to preparing them for what they'll be able to do as adults in the real world. I think there's sort of this bubble right now.
And also not saying that you have to go on the college track. I mean, there are many vocations that still need people to go and fill those jobs, and those jobs make a lot of money. You know, and not that it's all about money, but they're great jobs, and if people want to do a vocation instead of go to college, that's what they should be encouraged to do.
There are great examples of this happening already, sort of organically in different pockets of the city. I visited an auto body shop called Boston Body Works on Albany Street, and they have an amazing co-op program with Madison Park, the vocational high school that we have, where the kids get to learn about the latest technology, because so much of auto body repair these days is calibrating the systems, and then the teacher will pick 2 students to go on co-op, and they get to learn not just about how to repair the vehicles, but about how to run a business and all of these extra things that really make it possible for them to step into that role after graduation.
You seem to be getting a lot of the good things about the schools. What are some of the things that you'd want to see improved upon? Because obviously this is a huge issue, this election, and it has been for years. People are talking about the need for the schools to be better, whether we should have charter schools or more charter schools, I should say. So what are some of the things that you think are just top of your list? If you became a city councilor, these are the things that you want to start working towards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first is the recognition that there are a lot of good options in the district and that we need to do a better job of making that information accessible to parents. I remembered when I signed up my sister to register her for school, it was very confusing to even find out which school had which options, because we have such a rich portfolio of very different options in the district. So instead of a system where you go to the BPS website, you click on each school name, it opens up a separate document with a bunch of statistics. We should have a website where you can sort easily, filter things. So if you know your kid is interested in arts, what are the schools that have great arts programs? Or what are the schools that have a soccer team or advanced work class, whatever it is. I think another important piece is making sure that there are strong partnerships with outside institutions. When my sister was in middle school, they got to partner with, she went to the Elliott School in the North End. They got to go down to the harbor, partnered with a scientific environmental organization that lent them these sort of thigh-high boots, and they got in to test the water quality. And that's the stuff, as the caller was saying before, that really enriches the curriculum. There's so many institutions in Boston, organizations that would be able to help and contribute. Right now, all of it is falling on individual principals' shoulders to arrange. I think the Central District could play a larger role in making sure that every school has these partnerships, and also make sure that principals are really able to focus on the teaching and learning experience. So, for example, separating out, making sure there are 2 roles so that there is what's called an executive director or a facilities manager. So anything with paint needing to be repaired or supplies to be reordered, someone can make sure the school is functioning well as a building and with all the supplies. And then the principal or headmaster can focus on really making sure the teachers have everything they need to help with the quality of education too.
What about the school assignment plan?
I think it's a good first step. In my perfect world, and I think in a lot of parents' perfect worlds, there would be a neighborhood system where when you move into a neighborhood, even before you have kids, that's the school that my kid is going to go to one day. That'll allow you to feel great about getting involved in the community even before your kids are there. And I think that's the crucial piece, is that parents need to be able to make it to teacher meetings. They need to be able to contribute and participate. But if we were to go to that system today, there would be some neighborhoods right now, with the way that the quality schools are arranged, some neighborhoods where you have a great chance of getting a quality school, and some neighborhoods where you don't have a great chance of getting that. So I think this sort of intermediate step of reducing the amount of time that students are on buses, allowing them still to have quality options, while and I think this is a crucial second piece, really target the underperforming schools and lift them up individually.
Absolutely. And also we should mention that with busing, I mean, is a huge cost to the city each and every year. Obviously, the fuel costs a lot of money, maintenance on the buses costs a lot of money, and that really impacts the bottom line for the city budget.
Yeah, it's about $80 million. I think the interesting thing is, though, a lot of the cost, about half of it would still be there for special education, transportation, all that, but it is, every little bit could go back into programming, and that's a great point.
Absolutely. Public safety. This past couple days, we've heard of a horrific story out of South Boston with the murder of Amy Lord. There's also the issue, though, of a number of shootings that we've had happen in the city since the beginning of this year and even the beginning of the summer. So as a city councilor, how would you look to address the issues of public safety?
Yeah. And I actually just sent out an email over my list addressing these issues because I'm a young woman myself. My two sisters live with me. They're 16 and 22, just shocked and horrified at what happened. And I'm really glad to see that the resources of the Boston Police are going to address this. They're investigating. They're working with the public to get information. But I want to make sure that the focus on public safety doesn't just end after this case is hopefully resolved, but continues on. Because as you mentioned, there are many shootings and many acts of violence that go almost unnoticed in our communities. And there's actually a community activist that's been keeping track of how many shootings have occurred in Boston since April 15th, since the marathon. It's 94 to date. And I think most people will be very surprised at that number. So there are a number of things that I think we can do. This week I actually was at the Lila Frederick Pilot Middle School with Project Right on their Peace Walk. One example of many ways that the community is rallying together to say, violence is unacceptable and we need to do something about it. And I think supporting these efforts of really engaging the public, engaging residents, asking them for their solutions is key. I think another piece is, again, going back to schools, making sure that our young people have the tools to lead healthy lifestyles.
Right.
So can we make sure that there's conflict resolution classes in schools? We have mental health and social services, crisis counseling, so that all of our young people know, inevitably issues will come up. There's things at home that you're dealing with in the classroom. How do you address this and how do you move on in life? And again, the crucial other piece is making sure that we do have pipelines to opportunity, economic opportunity and jobs, so that youth feel like if I just stick it out in school, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I know I'm going to graduate with the skills to have a great lifestyle, a job in the city that I love. I think it's under supporting all of this with economic opportunity and then making sure that we're addressing the public health and public safety and mental health aspects.
We should also be teaching financial literacy in schools, just across the board. People need to be able to have the tools when they're getting out of high school, going into the workforce or going on to college and then into the workforce to know how to manage their finances.
The great thing about Boston is that we have such a local infrastructure in place already, right? Every single neighborhood has almost every neighborhood has a community health center and a library and schools and community centers. And can we make sure that each of these access points becomes a place where families can go to get help from all around, really wraparound services?
Right.
So, a parent that takes her 5-year-old in for a checkup at the community health center will get asked, do you have any special education issues? Could we interest you in this financial literacy boot camp we're having for parents? So that every aspect of someone's life is being addressed and supported whenever they interact with the city.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've talked about this on this program a number of times, and we have these kids who are running into trouble, and we have all these great programs here in the city, but they're not really targeting the kids who need the help, because we're talking to kids who are already wanting to go to these programs. So it's really getting into those kids who, for whatever reason, maybe they have a home life that isn't the best. They don't have an adult to really turn to, so then they're turning to other people around them who are not the best role models. And it's really trying to get to those kids and steer them on the right path.
Yeah, I really believe it's about libraries and really about health centers. I actually worked at Boston Medical Center for a bit in their medical legal partnership program, which brings lawyers on to address places where the law interacts with people's overall health. And I got to shadow at nearly all of the health centers around the city. And it's just fascinating, incredible, and inspiring that every health center is so targeted to the local community, right? So in Dorchester, you have Dorchester House Multi-Service Center, which has Vietnamese staff around Fields Corner for that community. And then, less than a mile away, you have Codman Square, which has staff that speak Haitian Creole. And so every community really feels like they are comfortable, welcomed, accepted, understood. And if we can bring more than just health into that equation, I think that's how we get at everyone.
Absolutely. Did you always want to run for office?
No, it's so funny. I grew up such a shy girl. I would say maybe your stereotypical Asian American young child. And my parents wanted me to be a doctor, not a doctor, an engineer. And then I said, I'm going to law school. And they said, okay, well, at least you'll make a lot of money. So now it's sort of like, oh, well. It really was through a path of things that happened with my family, getting to see from the side of someone dealing with government what it's like to really struggle. And I remember when my mom first got sick, those were some of the hardest days where we needed help. I have no idea where to start getting it, but it was just about, we're gonna make this happen. And having then worked in city government, I see the incredible potential of making that help available, and again, straight to people so that they don't need to be coming into City Hall or jumping over all these barriers to get at it.
And yeah, you just hit the nail on the head, because a lot of times candidates will come in and they'll talk about what they want to do when they're elected to the city council, but a lot of it is really that constituent service piece, which is what you're talking about with, if somebody's calling you up and they have a friend, a relative, or they themselves are calling and they need help, they're looking to you, if you're elected, to help them get to where they need to be.
And odds are, and I know this from personal experience, by the time they pick up the phone to call your office, that is not the first phone call they've made. They've likely exhausted a lot of other resources, and they're counting on you in many ways. And I think everything that we can do, especially in our city where there's so many resources, I feel very blessed to have been able, just on the campaign trail, to go around and experience and see so much of the good work that's happening. If we can just communicate that better even immediately, I think a lot of people will be better off.
What's your favorite neighborhood to campaign in?
Ooh, to campaign in. I have been spending a lot of time, this is such a dangerous question. I'm a South Ender, but my mom lives in West Roxbury, so I've actually been camping out at her house a lot to knock on doors in the area, voter-rich district and all of that. And we did a weekend where I'm all about the food options. So we were at Roach Brothers, we were at Little League and soccer and all that, but I got to go to Baker, the new bakery. I got to go to Sugar and The Real Deal and ice cream and Rock's Diner, so it was great. I actually had, at my wedding this past September, we had, for dessert, a cake that one of my friends who owns a bakery made for us, but also tartlets from Flour Bakery and brambles from Sugar in West Roxbury. So,
well, I have to tell you, and I've been telling this to other candidates on the show, FOMU and
I've
JP.
Heard of that. I have not been able to try it yet.
So they have two locations, JP and Alston. And it's the best ice cream you'll ever have. Okay. So you'll have to go there when you're either in Alston or in JP.
Will do.
Or do both. Do JP in the morning, have FOMU, and then the afternoon go. What are some of the things that you probably didn't know about the city, but now that you're campaigning, maybe you're going to East Boston, you see something or hear something, you're like, I had no idea this even existed, or had never heard something, just whatever it may be.
Little things come up all the time. I think overall it's just how incredibly diverse our city is. This past weekend I knocked on doors in South Boston for almost 4 hours with some members of my team. Just one precinct in South Boston, and I got to speak 4 different languages there. And just talked with residents about all the issues in their lives, but just met people from the Albanian community, so ethnically really diverse, but also people bring such different experiences to the conversations that you have on the doors.
Absolutely.
And that's been the best part.
So if people want to learn more about you, do you have a website that you can direct them to?
Yes, it is www.michelleforboston.com. It's Michelle with 2 L's, F-O-R spelled out, boston.com.
Perfect. And I want to thank you so much for being here, and
thank you,
obviously wish you the best of luck in September. Remind voters when they should go vote for you.
September 24th is a preliminary election. I will be number 14 on the ballot, and then November 5th is the final. So humbly and respectfully ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. That's going to do it for us for this segment. We'll be back with Gareth Saunders. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back. I'm Seth McCoy. Joining me now is Gareth Saunders, a candidate for at-large City Council. Gareth, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Seth. It's good to be here tonight.
It's so good to see you because we've known each other for a long time.
Yes.
I know I said I wasn't going to say that on air. I met Gareth when I was probably like 5 or something like that. But you used to be the District 7 City Councilor, which
Yes.
is when I met you.
That is true.
So now you're running for at-large.
Yes.
Are you crazy? It's a big difference from a district race to an at-large race. So
See, I was prepared when you were going to ask me why I'm running. I was going to say,
know.
because I'm crazy, No, I'm not crazy. I'm running for a lot of reasons, but the main reason is because I think I have a lot to offer our city. I have experience. I'm a 3-time successful District 7 City Councilor, covering mainly Roxbury, but parts of Dorchester, Fenway, Mission Hill, and the South End. So I feel that I bring a whole breadth of not only new ideas, but proven leadership.
But yeah, I mean, you've done the job,
Yes.
so you know what it takes. And
I know how to navigate
Right.
the maze of City Hall and city
Exactly,
government.
exactly.
And I'm a good listener. And so one of the things I've been doing over these last few years is listening to the people in the neighborhood. My wife and I, Michelle, live in Dorchester. So listening to people in the neighborhoods, Dorchester and all the other neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And I sense there's a sense of urgency today.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the reasons why I've decided to get back on the bicycle, if I can say. Once you learn how to ride a bicycle, you never forget.
That is true. And did you miss it? Did you miss being a city
Well, it's
councilor?
interesting. The first few years, I didn't miss it at all. So that showed me that I made a good decision to move on at that time. I didn't look back.
Right.
But after I got around the 5-year mark, I started thinking about being in office and sort of Monday morning quarterbacking
Yep.
and saying, wow, that's a tough vote. I'm glad I'm not there. Or, wow, I would do this much differently than the mayor or the city council.
Right. What are some of those votes that you would have done differently?
Well, I would say that there was some votes dealing with the school department. In the budget, I would have handled it a little differently. We spend, I think it's in excess of $1 billion on our school system.
Right.
And even though it's not about money solely, money is a big part of it. And I would have held the purse strings a little tighter and negotiated more with the school committee, and particularly the mayor, because a lot of people seem to forget that the mayor really controls the school committee.
Right.
And even though the school committee, the appointed school committee, is sort of a buffer,
Right.
but the mayor appoints all of the members and the board appoints the superintendent, but the mayor appoints them, so the mayor controls the school
Right.
system.
Do you think we should have an elected school committee?
I do.
Yeah.
Back in 1996, and I'm glad you asked me about this, back in 1996, I was one of the few elected officials to support an elected school committee. And one of the reasons I supported it because my constituents wanted it.
Right.
When the final results, and we got beat pretty badly in the city, but the 2 wards that I represented, Ward 12 in Roxbury and parts of Ward 14 in Dorchester, were the only 2 wards in the city of Boston that supported an elected school committee.
Right.
So I was doing my job. I was
Right.
representing my constituency.
Absolutely.
And I think elected is better because you give the people a greater choice.
Right, absolutely. And I think that we might have that opportunity again, depending on what happens in November and who the next mayor may be.
Yes.
I think it's kind of an exciting time. Not kind of, it is an exciting time because we will have this enormous change
Yes.
on the city council and then also in the corner office with the mayor. So it's going to be very interesting to see.
Yes, it's a very exciting time.
Yeah.
I'm so excited about this. Mayor Menino, and he's done a really good job, I think, over the years. But 20 years, many of the people would say, is a little too long.
Right.
And so now what I've noticed, there's like a new freedom and liberty around City Hall and the city. We're excited. We're going to have a new mayor, whether he or she, but we're going to have a new mayor. There are going to be new policies. We're going to have at least 5 new city councilors.
Right.
Maybe more.
Right.
An incumbent might get bumped off. You never know.
You never know.
So it's a very exciting time.
Because there are 17 people running for at-large.
Yes.
So anything could really happen. I mean, there's a lot of great candidates on the list, obviously. And, votes could be split. Votes could be just not how you expect them to be. So it must be very exciting for you being a candidate.
Yes. I mean, one of the things that I put together in my thinking and finally making a decision to run for at-large city council, there's going to be a vacuum of leadership in the council. And you know, I like to use the sport analogy. Like if you have a team, you want to have some new, young, innovative, energetic people, but you also want to have some veterans that that know what you know winning is all about and being successful. So you want to have the right mixture of veterans, experience, and young and new, fresh ideas.
And are you telling that to all the people that you're meeting now throughout the city, that you know the reason to vote for you is because you've been there, you've done it, so you know how the city council works, you know how to deliver city services, and that's why you'd be a good at-large
Yes, most
candidate?
definitely. I start off, I provide or I bring proven leadership and experience. The other part of it that I think makes me a very unique candidate is I stepped away. You know, I won 3 times, and I would have won a 4th time if I ran, but I wanted to pursue some of my other passions, and I stepped away. It's been over a decade now, and what that allows me is gives me fresh thinking, fresh ideas. I never believed that someone should be elected, sit in the same seat for decades. I'm against that. And matter of fact, I know you might ask me this question because I watch your show sometimes. One of the first things I would like to do is introduce legislations for term limits. I think that's important.
Yes, and I have talked about that several times, so I know that you've been watching. Yeah, because, you know, sometimes, like you said, there are people who come into office and they're there for a long time, and maybe they're not bringing new, fresh ideas, but people aren't going to run against them because they're an incumbent, and, you know, it's a lot of work to run for office, as you know, especially now that you're doing it citywide. So I fully support, if you are elected, that you should go forth and push for term limits.
And I hope the new mayor, because that's a little self-serving, would support term limits.
Oh yeah, it should be term limits across the board.
Yes.
And I also think that the city council should have a 4-year term instead of a 2-year term.
Right, and you know what, we had that discussion, and that's something that I could support. When I was thinking about the term limits, I was thinking for mayor, 2 consecutive terms, like our president does.
Right.
And if they take a break and want to come back, and the people still want that person to come back, fine, you can come back.
Right.
But I think 2 consecutive terms is long enough for you to get your agenda through.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about public safety. Michelle was just on the program. We were talking about it. There have been a number of shootings in the city, namely since April 15th, when, of course, we had the marathon bombings. How would you address that issue? I mean, that's something that you certainly dealt with when you were district councilor, and it's something that continues to occur, unfortunately, but we really need to sit down and address that. So if you're elected, how would you work to address that?
That issue is very close to me. I live in Dorchester in Ward 14, not too far from Talbot Avenue. And I remember being in a meeting about 8 years ago, and the police, it really bothered me, but the police called the area from Talbot Avenue, Blue Hill Avenue, Morton Street, up and then up to Fort Cartman Square, the murder triangle.
Right.
That's very disheartening for me.
Right.
Some of
It's
the things,
unacceptable, too.
It is,
I mean,
it's unacceptable.
That may, you know.
So I mean, I live in an area that has experienced some crime, so it's very close and dear to my heart. I think there are a number of things that we should do. I've come up with a formula, and basically I say, number 1, prevention. Number 2, enforcement. And then the third one, I call it restoration or rehabilitation, okay? Now, dealing with the prevention. Prevention is really getting the message out to the people, and particularly we want to get to the young people. So that means we have to have a very positive anti-violence message going into the schools, going to places where the young people are, the community centers, the health centers, the playgrounds, okay? Get a great group of people, mainly people who are advertisers, and I call them the Madison Avenue crew. You know, they really determine our spending patterns and our thinking patterns, and bring them in a room and say, look, let's come up with a great message that would resound throughout the city and touch young people. They know how to market to young people. And let's say violence is not acceptable.
Right.
Murder is not acceptable. Guns are terrible and bad, and that's part of the prevention.
Right.
Another part of prevention is legislation. We know about illegal guns. Anyone can get a gun as easily as you can get a bag of potato chips in the city. That shouldn't be. And I know we have to deal with federal legislation, but I'm thinking regionally, the states that abut us where it's easier to get guns, we as sort of a regional group should work together to stop the flow of illegal. Well, they're not really illegal sometimes,
right? Because
you can buy them legally and then you sell them to other people who don't have the right licensing and permits.
I can go to New Hampshire, buy a gun, and come back and sell it to you, and you don't have the license.
That's right.
So.
And then the enforcement part of it. That is supporting our law enforcement, our police, the men and women who risk their lives every day to save our lives and protect our lives and protect our property.
Right.
So I want to make sure that our police officers are really fairly compensated for the work that they do. And I think if you look at some of the police forces around the greater Boston, they are paid more than our Boston police officers. Some of them are. Okay. And so I want to make sure that they have fair compensation, professional development for them, and the technology. Make sure we get them the tools they need to do their jobs.
Yeah.
And then lastly,
you just hit on a good point, because that's something that I've been thinking about in recent weeks is the use of technology, because certainly there are things that are happening in the city, whether it's a shooting or a stabbing or some other violent crime, and there are so many cameras in and around the city, whether they're on municipal buildings or on private property. So to me, it's sort of like, okay, if there's a shooting in the South End and there are cameras all around, whether they're traffic cameras or on stores, shouldn't it be easy? And of course, I am not a police detective, so I don't know the whole ins and outs of how this works, but shouldn't it be easy to go and kind of track, okay, well, here's where the shooting happened. Let's get the videotape from here and see the timeline and see what we can find. And then to me, it would seem that you'd be able to solve crimes a little more easily because we have all this technology out there that can help do that.
Definitely. And I think Police Commissioner Davis was talking about it in relationship to the marathon bombings, that, they had to really go to private businesses and get the tapes. And then he was an advocate, if I remember correctly, of having more cameras, surveillance cameras, some of them controlled by the municipality.
Right.
And so that way you can have a sort of cohesive flow of cameras.
Yeah.
Another important thing that deals with technology is sharing of information.
Right.
That is so important, that we have our local police force, FBI, and the ATF and other agencies that deal with law enforcement to share the information.
And I know there are some people who get a little uneasy when we talk about, putting cameras everywhere and sharing data, but yes, there are some things that happen that we don't want going on when people are sharing data.
Sure.
But there are also some good things, and fighting crime, in my opinion, is a good reason to have cameras and to share data.
I mean, I'm not promoting a surveillance society, per se.
No?
But no. But there has to be a balance.
Yeah.
We live in a new world where we have to deal with terrorism, whether it's from abroad or even domestic terrorism.
Right.
So that's something that we have to deal with. Now, with the sort of restoration part of it, that people and families, and the congregation at the church I attend, Greater Love Tabernacle, Pastor Dickerson's a great pastor.
I love him. He's my favorite in the city.
It was very sad. Last Sunday, Pastor asked the congregation, if you know someone who was murdered, right, in your family or friend or neighbor, raise your hand. I would say about 80% of the people in the congregation raise their hands. That's unacceptable.
Right.
So one of the things that I wanted to share with you is that there's trauma associated with this violence.
Right.
Whether you're stabbed or shot, or if a family member is murdered, there's trauma. Now, I know that Boston Medical Center, their trauma unit, they have a great program, and they work with the Boston Public Health Commission, where if you're admitted to the hospital, they will follow you and track you and make sure that there's social work, there's programs, they can try to help you in ways to deal with the trauma. It's almost like being at war and having, stresses from an actual battlefield.
Yep.
So that's something that we really have to do. And, and then also deal with the criminal justice system.
Yes.
That's a problem. I know the Mayor Menino was talking about, people who have illegal guns, they're out on the street too quickly. Yeah. And that is a problem.
Absolutely.
So I think we need to look at that also.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of backwards in a way, because you might have somebody who's arrested for a minor drug offense, and by minor drug offense I mean marijuana.
Right.
And then they're in the system, and then it becomes increasingly more difficult for them to get a well-paying job, because they have that stigma attached to them if they spent any time in jail. When they get out, you have to check, if you've been convicted of anything, and that holds people back. And I'm sorry, but for something like marijuana, you should not be holding people back from going on and creating a nice life for themselves.
Sure, I agree with you. And I mean, community policing, we hear about that. That is so important. We have to foster better relationships with the community and the police department.
Right.
That's something we have to do.
And that's a two-way street. I mean, the community has to be willing to do that. And I mean the community as a whole in Boston, every single neighborhood. And also the police officers have to be willing to interact with different people from different races and ethnicities, not just, I'm going to stay in my car, or, I'm only going to go get out of my car if I have a call, or what have you. It really needs to be that, on the street, meeting the people, the store owners, the neighborhood people, and getting familiar with those. And not just neighborhood people that go to the crime watch meetings, but neighborhood people who, are just sitting outside or whatever. They just there needs to be more interaction between people.
I agree with you. And then we have some great police officers that interact very well with the community, and we have some that don't. That's just the reality. Another issue that really, when I talk to people in Roxbury, Mattapan, and Dorchester, and then in some other communities, they have a perception that we as a city, we as law enforcement, we put different value on different people's lives.
Right.
And, that perception shouldn't be. We need to work towards changing that.
Yeah, and how do you think we go about doing that, though? Because I feel like sometimes it's so ingrained in people's way of thinking that it's almost, even if you're doing all the right things to show them that every life is valuable, there's a disconnect.
Sure. I think you start at the top. And one of the things that I plan to do after I'm elected to the city council is to call for a meeting with the new mayor and sit him or her down and talk about that. I mean, that's a real issue. It's like almost like some of the decision makers are falling asleep at the wheel. And then every life is important.
Right.
Every murder is one murder too many.
Right.
And so I would like to have a very candid conversation with the next mayor about this and talk about ways that we could link different law enforcement and community agencies together and really change the perception of many of our citizens about how law enforcement goes about policing.
Right.
And one issue that really bothers me and a lot of people in Boston is there are unsolved murders.
Right.
How can you deter crime when there are murderers walking around our streets who have gotten away with murder?
Yeah.
And they probably feel, I got away with it once, I can do it again.
Exactly.
So how can we have a serious crime fighting force if, and I would deal with the Suffolk County DA's office, whoever's in that office at that time.
Yes, you never know.
You never know. The current one may be sitting somewhere else.
He could be the mayor.
So I think it's important that we work with the DA's office and the police commissioner's office, the mayor's office, and faith communities, nonprofits, and neighborhood associations, and say, how can we tackle this really critical issue where we're not deterring crime enough in the city?
Right, exactly. And we also have to go back and look at the younger generation and talk to them and say, what do you need from us? We're talking about this with Michelle and saying, there are kids who are in the community centers and they're doing the programming. Those are not the kids that we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about this group of kids who is still lost and looking for somebody to guide them, and they're falling into somebody's hands who is not guiding them in the right way.
Yes.
And it's those kids, and that's been my question. I've talked about that on the show numerous times, is how do we reach those kids?
Yes, That is so key. My wife and I, we were talking the other day, and I was asking Michelle, I was like, look, how do you think we can really make a difference?
I would just want to clarify, that's Michelle, your wife, not
Michelle,
Michelle
my wife. No, not Michelle Wu, who was here, sitting here
Yeah.
before me. Michelle, my wife.
Yeah.
And she said, politicians and decision makers just need to talk to the people.
Thank you. See,
And,
I
I mean,
like your wife. I've never met your wife, but I like her because that's exactly what I'm saying.
And I
You
was
have
like,
to just talk to them.
You're right. That's basic.
Yeah.
Because the people who are there on the front lines, they know what's going on.
Right.
And how many times do important people talk to them?
They don't.
They don't. Not
and that's
enough.
what I've been saying for years. I'm like,
So-
if people just sit down with those kids, like get them into a room.
That's right.
And say, how can we help you? Because we don't
Mm-hmm.
want you to go down this path and end up like, and you know what? Show the pictures of all these kids who have been murdered before them.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want you to end up like this kid. You know, we want you to end up like this kid and, you know, have a picture of a doctor or, you know, a lawyer or a electrician or whatever it is, but show them that there's a better way.
And you know what? It's not like you know, rocket science.
Right.
I mean, talk to the young people and their parents because they play a role.
Yep.
We know that if the economic conditions are better, usually there's less crime.
Right.
We know if the school systems are better, there are less dropouts, there's less young people hanging out on the streets. When that's a formula of disaster. If young people are hanging out on the corners, trouble's going to happen. But if we have them in schools, they're learning, they're engaged, they're motivated, they're graduating, we won't have so much crime in our
Yeah,
city.
and I think also, you know, again, going back to just talking to those kids, some of them might be in homes that are not the best homes to be in.
Sure.
And so to have an adult, especially an elected official, come to them and say, how can I help you?
Yes.
That to them could mean the world. You know, I mean, it's just that old adage of, you know, you see somebody on the street and you say hello, they could be having the worst day in the world, but a stranger just said hello to them or complimented them, and now they're like, okay, things aren't so bad today.
And we have to give these young people alternatives. Some of them just know one way. They see, you know, what's going on down the block, and that's all they know.
Right.
But we have to say, no, there are other things that you can do. There's other types of lives you can live.
Right.
And that's why mentoring programs are important,
Yeah.
and after-school programs are very important. They cost money. We have to find ways to fund them.
Yep.
But I think there are critical parts of a comprehensive plan and solution.
And we also have to make sure the Boston Public Schools are the best that they can be.
Most definitely.
So how would you work to help that situation? Because of course that's been something that's been talked about for years.
Yes.
The need for better public schools, and we certainly have good schools here in Boston, but they all need to be good, not just okay.
I think, you know what, my favorite saying, it starts from the top. The mayor's office,
Yep.
of course, the city councilors and the school committee members, we have to have a long-term commitment and focus on the school. And I think sometimes elected officials have lost focus.
Right.
So, you know, we can make some short-term goals, but we also have to make some long-term goals. It's not going to happen overnight. So one, you have to make a commitment. One is we have to have schools in every district, in every community and neighborhood of this city that are performing well.
Yep.
How do you do that? We know how to do it. We've done it in the past. I know when I was in office, I'll give you one example, the Burke High School. In the 90s, it was losing its accreditation.
Yep.
And then we turned it around. We collectively, the mayor, the school committee, we turned it around where like 80% of the kids from the Burke were going to college.
Right.
Then you know what happened? Then there were some budget cuts and they pulled away the resources. And then so we have to find ways not to pull away those resources because we know how to improve schools.
Well, frankly, the budget focus should be on the schools and not in the administration of the Boston Public Schools, in my opinion. You know, we spend a lot of money in the administering of how Boston Public works, you know, at Court Street, when the money, in my opinion, should be spent at the schools first. And then, you know, obviously you need people at Court Street talking about how schools should be running, doing, you know, the different things that they have to do as administrators. But the bulk of the budget should be focused in on the schools.
The new mayor, the new superintendent, because we will, I'm sure within the next year, we will hire a new superintendent. The focus has to be, you know, academic excellence. It has to be.
Yep.
You know, and then it trickles down. That means all the principals and headmasters,
Yep.
administrators, they will echo what they hear from the top.
I do want to say John McDonough is the superintendent right now
Yes.
for Boston Public Schools, and he is fantastic, great gentleman.
I know, John, I agree with you.
Yep.
I
And
agree
so
with you.
I would
Yes.
not, I mean, I don't know if he wants to stay on after the next mayor is in office, but he maybe should throw his hat in the ring if he so chooses.
I see he found a great spokesperson.
I know,
huh?
right? He's no.
Yes.
He called me before the show and was like, if you could put,
No.
no, I'm kidding.
No.
But he's great, so.
But I mean, one of the things, and you know, it happens all the time. There are shifts in the demographics of the children, and so we have to plan where we're going to build the next elementary schools or
Right.
early learning centers, where we're going to build the next middle schools, and so forth. So those are not new things, and you have to population demographics shift all the
Right.
time. Schools in great disrepair. I know the Globe had an article maybe 4 weeks ago about Madison Park.
Right.
You know, you have to have buckets in the middle of the classroom,
Yeah, which
leaky
is-
ceilings. That's unacceptable. Mold in the air conditioning
Not
system,
healthy.
not healthy. So then we really have to sit down. Now that costs money, and I understand that,
Yeah.
but sit down, do an audit of all our schools, improve the physical plan. I think that's part of it.
Yep.
But even more importantly is we have to have motivated headmasters. Have to give them a certain amount of autonomy because they know what they need, and pay our teachers well. They need to be compensated well, and we need to have professional development for them and some type of incentives to keep. We want to keep the teachers motivated
Yes.
so they can motivate the students.
Absolutely. And on that note, real quickly, can people find you online?
Yes, you can go to my website. It's up and it's in construction.
Yeah.
It's Gareth for Boston.
Perfect. Gareth
Yes.
for Boston. I want to thank you for being here today. It was great seeing you and great having
It
you
was
here.
good seeing you.
And I want to thank everybody at home for tuning in, everybody behind the scenes for putting together a great show, and we will see you next time.
And I should say .com.